would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it. All right, I am joined this evening with the one and only Tom Joseph Brown. Well, there may be more, but he's the main one. Tom is a natural philosopher interested in experiencing the sacred source of our living world through natural scientific works inspired by Goethe, seeking detectable cosmic influences on earthly substances, raising consciousness via the cognition of the archetypal, drawing attention to the errors of scientism. He has a background in biogeometric approaches to weather engineering, the light side of weather engineering, if you will. And he's currently working with bioarchitects to bring this knowledge and technology into community building design. So lots of awesome stuff. And Tom's also, I don't know how many times I've referenced things that you've taught me in regards to certain studies that help lend a lot of insight and credence to things like the work of alchemy and different alchemical procedures and alchemical philosophy. Is that, it's something I interview quite a bit of operative alchemists in that world, and I'm always like, oh yeah, Lily Kaliska's study on this and that, and those are things that I learned from you. So I definitely want to give credit where it's due in that regard, because you helped open my eyes up to a lot about that stuff. Is there any additional things that you want to add about yourself and your backgrounds for the listeners before we get into it?
No, that's pretty good. I think I was kind of known more in the past because I was the director of Borderland Science Research Foundation back when it was actually a functioning operation, and edited 50 issues of the Journal of Borderland Research and published a lot of books, ether physics. We resurrected a lot of books, looked into radionics, subtle energy healing, all of that, as well as Vajrayana. I haven't published too much on that, but that's been a sort of back-end study for me since I was young, studying our place in the universe as perceived through the mandala, which is us. So, no, but overall, thank you. It was very nice to hear that, and I'm glad I was able to influence you. I've talked, some people go, oh man, that guy stole my idea. I go, man, I wish people would steal my ideas. It's like, I don't care. That's the point. The reason I learned so much is I was very fortunate. I had some wonderful mentors along the way that were very kind, gave me all sorts of information along the way. And, I feel it's basically a duty and obligation to share that and pass it on. I can only share my unique perspective, and I'm sure some people would disagree with it, and that's their perspective. So that's all we can do is, and you take what you can. And that's why, when we get to the borderland sciences and, the etheric realms, as Trevor Constable, the etheric weather engineer, always said, because only results count. He said, people have been arguing about the ether for thousands of years. He said, I just engineer it. He goes, I don't have time for an argument. So it's that approach. What's the pragmatic approach to this? So, we call it pragmatic metaphysics, perhaps.
Definitely. Yeah. And, we haven't talked in a while, but you're definitely one of my favorite people to talk to. So I've been looking forward to catching up with you, and you're always up to something behind the scenes. I was recently poking around on your website, alchemics.art, and I always love how like nitty and gritty you get when it comes to displaying information, and I think you do a really amazing job of like selecting the most important aspects of things and the most important studies and information that to really illustrate your points. So one of your recent articles was the anthroposophic universe. So I wanted to get into that a little bit, but I don't know. I want to ask you, do you think should we cover you think it'd be good to talk a little bit about the foundations of conscious awareness prior to getting into that, or we can go about it how
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a good introduction. That's why I used to try to cover that in the first couple of slides of my lectures, but it's turned into a whole like 60 to 90-minute presentation. Because the more I dig into it, every day there's like more slides coming out and doing it. And I think, but we can get it in very basics. There's sort of two fundamental schools of philosophy as I see them in Western philosophy. And we could, of course, there's a lot of variations, as you know. But fundamentally, I look at like Plato and Aristotle and their concepts of ideas, right? To Plato, an idea comes from this pure ideal realm. And we only see the shadows here on Earth. You know, we know the whole Plato's cave analogy. And we can only really approach that through our rational part of our soul and learning how to do that. And it's, well, you know, this gets into the the paradox, paradox of knowledge, right? If you're searching for wisdom, well, if you don't know what wisdom is, how in the world are you going to know what it is when you find it, right? So there's this concept, anamnesis. And anamnesis is the remembering of, basically your knowledge of that pure state from where the soul emanated. So we have this divine knowledge deeply within us, but we lose it when we're born. Whereas we look at, like, from the Aristotelian perspective, we're born with a blank slate. And although there's an inherent sort of structure and knowledge and manifestation, we're limited, and we can only know little bits of that. And we can sort of see how that evolved into eventually, like Immanuel Kant's, I call limits of cognition, right? We had the intellectus ectipus, right? Where we can only know these little bits. We can only build up little pictures of little glimpses that we get of all these little pieces. And we can never know the true picture, which he actually coined the term subsensible, right? We can only know the subsensible, according to Galileo, that which can be weighed and measured. And what's beneath it, the atomic stuff. But we can't know the greater part, as Kant said, what he called the intellectus archetypus. He said to know that would be like knowing the mind of God, and we can't know that. But Goethe said he was like a living example that Immanuel Kant was wrong, that it's actually a birthright and destiny to know this archetypal realm. And really, that was the foundation in many ways of Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science. How do we know this archetypal realm? If we look at Steiner's work, with this whole hierarchy of spiritual beings on up, well, perhaps he could see them. In my mind, I've never seen them in that way. I can perceive that they're there. I've seen into the ethers. I can see where the pathway is to go there. It's a lot of work. Some people have it naturally. Some people are born. So I think for me, it was really just trying to find this. I could always see the archetypal nature of things. I did have that, but I'd never really personalized it all as sort of Archangel Michael and this and that. They're kind of cool archetypes, I think, but some people take that stuff too seriously, I think. Maybe they're out there. And also, I came across something that Steiner also mentioned, that kind of the common clairvoyance that people get, that's actually those are young souls. They're actually in this phase of consciousness, really the old forms of clairvoyance, where we had this deep knowledge of this realm before, like the Copernican revolution. That's actually transformed into true intellectual capacity. but not intellectual capacity where it's just book learning, Popper's falsifiability, only, like you following Immanuel Kant, we can only build up these little bits and that's all we know. And we can make these hypotheses and guess, and that's the best, and that's where we're at, so march forward, pay your taxes and, obey the authorities. Because really that's where it leads to, right? There's this whole philosophical underpinning which denies the freedom of the soul. And the freedom of the soul is based on our connection to the spiritual world. But the spiritual world I don't see as something vague. I see it as a defined process that we can follow through. And in some senses, I see the Vajrayana mandala as sort of the core of that in my being. When I was young, I studied ceremonial magic. I went through all that stuff. I read all of Crowley and McGregor Mathers and Israel Regardie. And it was quite an influence on me. I loved it. I used to do, what was his name? Butler, Training and Work of the Magician, right? I thought that was a very good book. I recommend that to many people to start learning the banishing ritual of the pentagram and just learn to seal your space off. But I was also studying the Tibetan work, and I didn't even know why, right? I was attracted to it, but it puzzled me because it didn't make sense. And I was trying to learn all the words of all the gods, and it's like, what in the hell are they even talking about? And it wasn't even, it was when I finally came across Lama Anagarika Govinda's work, the Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism. I had read his Way of the White Clouds earlier, and I just, I always had a feeling for this whole Tibetan and Chinese and Oriental sort of feeling, but also the Western occult tradition. So I was always kind of balancing them, which is which. And then one day I got that book by Anagarika Govinda, and I read it, and I was thinking, this makes sense. Now I know why I was following this. The mandala is the same thing as the banishing ritual, right? You're centering yourself in magical space. But that magical space is very real. And as you find, by studying the Bardo Thodol, that's a space you go through when you become disembodied. When you're no longer in this physical shell, then you've got to deal with these forces in their disembodied state. So you might as well learn to face them now. And so, yeah, that's what I know. I'm kind of maybe all over the place in a sense, but I'm trying to speak from one sort of piece where I found all these little pieces that I find, where's my center in all this? And that's what I found through Rudolf Steiner's and Goethe's work, more through Goethe and Steiner's students like Ernst Lehr's, the book Man or Matter. I called it my Bible. Those were my two main books for many years, was Man or Matter and Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism, because they read to me as the same process. I was seeing the same thing in there. One was more external, one was more internal, in the development of this higher cognition. And it was Ernst Lehr's book which turned me on to the metamorphoses of plants. And this actually leads us into the anthropocentric world, right? Steiner called it anthroposophy. Well, what does that mean? We have stuff like anthropogenic global warming, right? Which we know, anybody really looked into it, we know it's a hoax. Of course, humans followed their nest thanks to the crappy technology the corporate enforcers force us to use, while all the great technologies have been suppressed. But that's such a small part of everything that's happening. And we know that vast changes in the solar system happening now coming in. I don't know if you've followed any of that work.
I haven't been following it lately. Yeah, I've been out of following that for a while now. So I was going to ask you about that later down the line. I was curious what the state of things.
We won't divert, because you asked me about the anthroposophical world and the foundational basis. So the foundational basis is you need to connect with the archetypal realm. And because that's what we're the center of. So in essence, right, the Earth goes around the sun. There's a lot of proofs for that. Although if you look at Tycho Brahe's work, what was it? The guy's name escapes me. He'll come back to me. This Jesuit astronomer and polymath. He'll come to me. But he basically took Tycho Brahe's work And instead of the circular orbits, he put elliptical orbits and found that the solar system still works with Earth in the center with elliptical orbits.
Are you talking about like the Copernican versus the Tychonian model? Or
Yeah, but following, because Tycho model is what we experience, right? When they're launching a rocket from NASA, they're calculating according to the Tychonian model. They have to, right? The heliocentric model is abstract. We never experience it. It's like our bones, right? You never experience your bones unless you break one and it's jutting out of your skin, right? And that's a rather painful experience. Our bones are like our subconscious in many ways. And in many ways like that, the heliocentric system is like our bones, right? It's a distribution in space of these large bodies. But what do we experience? We experience as though Earth is a center. And all life corresponds to that. And we find that in plant morphology. So part of the Goethean process is to understand the whole of a plant. That's a meditative exercise. So what we call the process and the method, which are intertwined. The process is dealing with like one single species where you learn it, and the method is then applying it to the greater interactions within, say, the biosphere and cosmic environment. But it starts out with knowing the whole of a plant, studying a plant from the seed to the flower through its various stages, the cotyledons, the stem, the leaves, on up to the calyx, the flower. It's this whole process, which back to a seed. But then you build that up in consciousness. And in the old days, like in Goethe's day, right, he had to study it all year, right, for years and make notes and do it. But now we can go on the internet, go to YouTube and look up time lapse. You can watch this stuff forward and backwards all you want. And I recommend people do that. Start studying plants forward, backward, get it in your mind and do it. And when you can build up that whole picture in your mind of the whole plant, beyond the discursive temporal perception that, say, we're looking at right now, this creates a new organ of cognition and consciousness, because people's worldview is their organ of cognition. And it's tied in with the limbic cortex. We know that from like Joe Dispenza's work, this whole, how do you like get around that chemical brain that you're wired into to become this new person that's not creating this reality around them that was imprinted, genetically and mimetically from being young. And we have the neocortex, which allows us to reprogram that. But the limbic programs, especially when not trained properly, override the neocortex. And I learned this, right, because years back, for a while when there was, I've heard about the flat earth stuff when I was young, and I knew even when I was a teenager, I read, what was it, Morning and the Magicians, Powles and Bergier, right? They were talking about, the concave, where on the inside, some of the Nazis, they were doing these infrared experiments up on the Baltic island of Rügen. And I was always fascinated. And then I came across like Koresh's work where they were forcing a mechanical line and run on the inside. Is fantastic. And I've never really been that geometric of a person. I've done all the sacred geometry with, ruler and compass and all of that. But to think in geometric terms, it was really not my forte. Probably because I didn't apply myself too much to it. So I talked to somebody about surveying, and they were talking about triangulation. It didn't quite click until I met a geodetic surveyor, Jesse Kozlowski, a brilliant gentleman. I actually connected with him over arguments with flat earthers. I was going, this guy's good. And he's making these videos showing how you can measure the curvature of the earth in 300 meters, right? With reciprocal zenith angles on plumb lines, using optical equipment. It's not hard to really measure, you can tell. And got into that. And so tried to discuss this with flat earthers, and what we found out right away, it's like a cult. They don't want to know. They've got their program and that's it. And it was so fascinating, it drove me into neurological studies of cult programming and belief systems. And of course, the chemical brain. And how do you get around this? Of course, one way is, the trivium and quadrivium. So I certainly recommend people follow that, to really know how to assess. Because what's happening right now, people with their worldview, it's a false logic filter. Oh, the reason I brought up the flat earthers is because for a while, Jesse had a flat earth page called Flat Earth Can't Geodesy. And we're getting all the main guys on there to argue with us. And it turned into a shit show, right? Talking about the insults and God, these people, that was insane. And, you come under virulent attack from these people. And, accused of being NASA pedophiles and all this sort of stuff. He's like, yeah. I'm going, come on, man. You think, look, they got like, it's all these satellite companies. And you think, they go, nobody's ever seen the Earth from space. I go, yeah, look, there's Himawara 8, right? It's up real time. You can watch, the Western Hemisphere from, basically, the Pacific. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. It's a Japanese satellite.
Probably.
I go, but that's just CGI. I'm going, yeah, but so is that computer screen you're looking at. Nothing's real. If you're saying that's a meaningless term. But what was interesting was we were arguing with them. There was a lot of surveyors and scientists on this list because for a while there was a phase where I'd get up in the morning, make coffee, and do what I call sport arguing, practice my vocabulary and how good I could lay out an argument. But Jesse, like myself, was into Electric Universe and Steiner. And a lot of these other scientists and surveyors weren't. They were like hardcore, what I call the black hole worshipers. And, you get just as virulent a reaction from them as you do from the flat earthers when you challenge their worldview. And it's fascinating, right? But it's what Wilhelm Reich called the biopathic reaction, right? When your worldview is challenged, your worldview should be flexible, until you've discerned. But all this stuff, the flat earth, it's abstract. Just like black holes are abstract. If you look into them, they're nonsense, right? I call them the final trajectory point of Galileo's cannonballs.
One of the things I do like about this whole flat earth thing is that it really instigates people to discover for themselves and learn a lot of complicated and interesting things that they otherwise would have probably never even looked at. So it's kind of been interesting for me, just observing, and like sometimes I'll listen to some of these debates if I have the capacity, and I'll hear some good points, and then I'm like, and then I'll go look it up. I'll learn a little bit about different theories, what they're talking about, and it just allows, like you said, like you have to have a flexible consciousness and a flexible response to these things, and not be so like rigid about your particular ideology, or else you're never gonna grow in terms of your mental capacities and whatnot. And I wanted go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, well, that's how I approached it. I was trying to turn them onto the anthropocentric world. I'm going, look, there's something far, now that your mind's open that things may not be as they are, let's go a little farther. Look at some of these other things. And it's like, I couldn't get past this like black and white. You're either a flatty or a globy, right?
That's they get angry.
Yeah. There was no discourse, but I understand exactly what you mean. It does open some up. Yeah.
I was wondering, like, so one of the things that I have been curious about and I haven't explored is, like you were talking about with that measurement of the curvature. Like I would think about maybe geographically different regions are going to have a fluctuation in that curvature depending on, maybe there's a mountain range or whatever. So I was curious a little bit about that process and how they derive a generalized curvature.
Oh, it's not hard to find. They've actually known it for thousands of years. It's actually, believe it or not, the heliocentric globe model is actually the oldest model of them all. It actually comes out of the old Zoroastrian, the Magi. They were into that stuff. And people say, oh, yeah, well, I got this. The astrolabe. Astrolabe proves flat Earth. I go, I've actually made astrolabes. I commissioned what was probably the first astrolabe ever for New Zealand and one of the first few Southern Hemisphere ones. And I worked on a project, about 27 years ago now, which never proceeded. But when the GPS chips first came out, and I was going to do I want to do a little device, mobile electronic astrolabe. So anywhere on Earth you are, you've got your astrolabe, you know, to show it. But in order to do that, I mean, it's all based on spherical trigonometry. I mean, sure, the thing's acting on a plane, but think of a protractor, right? You have a protractor, it's got 360 degrees, right? Look at one of those degrees is 70 miles, right? Or 111 kilometers. So 3 degrees, but just, I mean, look at it, I mean, that's like hardly anything. I mean, you can go top of the highest point in Wales and you can see some of the French Alps. And if you look on a protractor, see, I mean, the mountains in comparison to the size of the Earth are tiny. They're not like giant things jutting out. I mean, that's like, well, we should see the buildings leaning over the
So
no. And this gets into projective geometry, and it's part of the greater thing. But I wanted to stick, I was almost getting to the point with the plants.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because these all tie together. And I know it's a wide-ranging thing, and that's why I'm actually working out this workshop sort of program, which is actually about 10 hours of material to bring all these points in. It's a really wide picture. But once you get the core, you start seeing it everywhere. And that's, so basically the whole of the plant, right? You start seeing it. And what Goethe did is by studying these plants, he was able to see what he called the archetypal plant, or the Urpflanze. And where every plant on the planet is an expression, it's a metamorphic expression, right? They each metamorphose within themselves through their stages. It's like humans, like we're born as a full human, you know, average healthy human, all our organs are in place, all of that stuff. As long as no accidents or the doctors chop us up, you know, from birth to death, we're that full human with some minor changes at puberty and menopause, et cetera. But a plant only has one organ, the plant, right? I mean, it's not like you take a seed and you throw it in a bucket of water and a flower pops out like a sponge, right? It has to actually weave into space, right? This anastomosis, the stuff literally weaves into space. That's the light ether weaving these things, drawing them from the ground and weaving them, the levity force. So the whole of the plant is a single organ. So be able to see that single organ as one. And that's what Goethe achieved that. And like Schiller argued with him, he said, well, that's an idea. And Goethe said, yes, but I can see an idea. He said, you have to be careful. You have to be able to see things and not see past them, right? Because the discursive consciousness, you see past them. You need to look with the eye of the spirit. And that's what the Goethean approach to science is, about developing the eye of the spirit and bringing that in with, of course, functional things. So where is this archetypal plant? So can we see that idea? Well, following us along, there's a school called School of Thought, Cosmological Botany, Planetary Influences Upon Plants. And what we find in there, and it's actually very fascinating. This blew me away. I would say there's actually a book called Planetary Influences Upon Plants by Ernst Michael Kranich, Cosmological Botany. And I tell people that was the greatest spiritual book I ever read. Because when I read that and went out and started meditating in the garden and thinking about the cosmos and the plants, and it actually connected me. I go, God, now I get it. Now I see where these guys are going with this. And that is, and what you realize is that is the Tychonian world is the driver of plant morphology, right? Those are the astral forces, right? What astral stars, but the planets are the wandering stars. That's what they mean. So the forces are basically the concentric spheres, as we could call them, and the physical planets are like shepherds. And there's actually sort of two of them. There's like an inert and an alert one. The inert one's what's happening around the sun and controlling the sun. And of course, we've got the radio astronomy of John Nelson from RCA. You know, we know about that. And also, we call the radioactivity decay rates on Earth vary with solar activity and solar rotations. So anyway, there's reasons for that. But then there's all this other activity that happens on Earth according to the geocentric positions. And you mentioned earlier Lily Kalisko's work. That's one of the great examples, you know, where basically, depending on the position of the planets and the metals related to them in ancient alchemical thought, like gold in the sun, silver in the moon, you get different reactions in the crystallization patterns from them. And, you know, that for people to understand, the most simple way is gold won't crystallize properly when during a solar eclipse, when the moon goes in front of the sun, gold's crystallization patterns distort. Kalisko found this in the 1920s through the 1940s. But what's interesting, in the early 1960, 1964, she gave a talk to some anthroposophical physicians on gold and the sign of the times. And she was saying, well, basically these dark streaks and deformed patterns she was getting during solar eclipses in the gold, she was getting them all the time, starting in the mid-50s. Well, of course, what started then, you know, the heavy radar systems and everything that started coming online. If we look at Arthur Furstenberg's work, he even shows that during that time, you know, with these big heavy radar things coming in, you start getting influenza epidemics. And so all this whole electronic system of the planet is actually cutting us off from the cosmos and from these higher realms. So that's why I see these natural sciences for developing them, whether there's any hope in this current phase of humanity or we're just planting seeds, hopefully for the next one, if we survive the impending cataclysms. We need to move this stuff into the, you know, basically the etheric sort of realm, the etheric records.
I have a couple.
The Akashic records, that's what I was, yeah, go ahead. I'm talking loud. Feel free to stop me and ask questions at any point.
I'll get back on track, but there's a couple questions I want to ask. In your opinion or estimation, do you feel like there has been things that NASA has lied to the public about, or, you know, hidden from the common consciousness, or what's your opinion on all that? Because it seems like there's some reasonable evidence to suggest that they have, not to say that they haven't been to the moon or things like along these lines, but maybe the way that it was displayed to us was false, or things along these lines. Like, what's your perspective or opinion on that?
Yeah, well, people ask me, I said, do you think we went to the moon? And my answer is, not the guys they showed us on television. They definitely didn't go. There's no doubt. And I've been into that for a long, long time. I used to think we found alien bases, right? I've got on my bookshelves, which is just a picture of, because this library's in storage, there's actually 2 shelves of books on the moon. I've been reading this stuff since I was a teenager. And all that Leonard's, you know, someone else is on the moon, right? Because those first lunar orbiters, the craters, I mean, it's almost like there's like mining and digging going on the rims of craters, and there's rolling boulders, there's all kinds of stuff. And there's also like weird clouds and stuff, you know, like cigar-shaped clouds, which of course have been seen on Earth too, you know, the 1890 airship mystery and stuff. So there's definitely some weird stuff. And I had like Fred Steckling's book, you know, We Discovered Alien Bases on the Moon. And I liked all that. And, you know, Bruce De Palma, the End Machine, are you familiar with his work?
I've heard of the End Machine, but no, I'm not.
Yeah, Bruce De Palma, he was a physics lecturer at MIT. He sort of lost his standing because he started demonstrating things outside the laws of physics. And his End Machine was a big Faraday disk where he was basically getting like, you know, using standard equations, he was getting like 200 to 300% efficiency out of input versus output. Of course, they weren't getting that physically. They were only getting that in measurements, you know, but he believed it could be tapped, and he did a lot of work on that. But anyway, Bruce was a good friend. I knew him from California, and he moved to New Zealand and actually gave eulogy at his funeral in New Zealand, you know, probably 25 years ago or whatever it was. But he was an interesting guy. He was also Dr. Land's protege at Polaroid for a while and worked on Polaroid land camera and polarized sunglasses. He was an expert in polarization. I remember one of the first times I met him in California, and we're sitting around chatting and talking about the moon, and he's going, we never went. I go, yes, we did. We found alien bases and stuff. He's going, no way, we didn't go. I go, how do you know? He goes, I'm a photographic expert. He said, those photos are too perfect. And we got into it. He actually put me in touch with Bill Kaysing. And Bill Kaysing, he wrote we never went to the moon, America's $30 billion swindle. He was one of the first guys. He was a Rocketdyne scientist or something. So I started corresponding with him. But I discovered stuff like this whole mystery of stars in space, because I sort of stumbled across this. I'd come across, it was in Ralph Renee's book, NASA Mooned America, and I corresponded with Ralph as well. And he was talking about, he had one chapter on how the astronauts, someone going, wow, man, stars, the stars are beautiful, it's so bright, it's just amazing to see all these stars, and other ones are going, wow, it's so black, this deep blackness, you can't believe it, you've never seen anything like it. I'm going, well, is it bright or is it black? Because those are not the same thing, right? So anyway, when I got into Goethe's theory of color, which is, again, is another foundation of my work, in the non-Newtonian, there's no color in light. The color is formed from the interaction of darkness and light. So I start getting the atmospheric color formation. So anyway, so I give NASA a call, and I say, well, yeah, look, I'm doing this research project on atmospheric color formation, and I need to see a spectrograph of the sun and the optical wavelengths in not white light in space, right? They're going, we don't have that information. I'm going, come on, man, you guys been up there like 25 years, Skylab, et cetera, et cetera. Nope, no information. I go, how about just some white light photos of the sun? Nope, nothing. I go, white light photos of stars? Nope, don't have any. I go, what do you have? I went through a few people, and I finally got this guy, Mike Gentry. He was down at the Public Relations Department in Johnson Space Center in Houston, and he got intrigued by this. So he started feeding me stuff like Eddie's book on the new sun, looking at all this. And basically all the pictures, whenever you see all these pictures of the sun, they're done in emission band filters and extreme ultraviolet for the most part. You see all those ones, people, there's a hole in the sun, right? Well, no, that's just, that might be like a, ionized iron, in a certain wavelength, right? There's all these different ones. Because you can download this stuff. It's there all day. I was talking to somebody a few months ago, and they're going, we can't see the back of the sun. I'm going, where'd you hear that? He goes, TikTok. I'm going. I pull up my phone. I go, look, I get the solar rotations daily. You can download the stuff on your phone. Stay off that TikTok science, And like I say, with the flat earth people go, well, does NASA lie? I believe on some stuff, yes. On other things, perhaps not. But they're not the sole arbiter of stuff. And I'm not too concerned with some of their readings. Yes, it's interesting. But we want to see the natural world. Like Steiner said, that microscopes and telescopes are blinders. But they'll blind us to the true natural processes that we need to understand in order to advance in the spiritual sciences properly. And this is true, too, when we're talking about the trivium and the quadrivium. Right, and they've matched the Pythagorean triangle, right? So you got the trivium is 3, 4, 5 triangle. The 3 is the trivium, the 4 is the quadrivium, which is the external world, and the 5 is our 5 senses, right? And through all of that, properly trained, like Goethe said, the senses don't deceive, the judgment deceives. And the solution, of course, to the Pythagorean triangle, you can't find it in a linear fashion. You need to know the science of the roots, the root math. And that was like a great secret to the initiates in the past. Of course, they teach it in school now, but I don't know, I think they just teach woke ideology now. But at least when I was young, they taught stuff like that in school. But that's like an analogy for it. And through that, through the trivium, quadrivium, and the senses, properly trained, you can discern all you need to reach the highest levels of the initiatory processes on this plane. So when we look at things, like people say that like quantum mechanics and stuff, that's a new spirituality, right? We're learning all these things. That stuff's an offense against the ancient traditions. You're not learning anything. They reach, I remember when the movie came out years ago, What the Bleep. This friend of mine came over to see me, he goes, he's going, man, I saw this movie, you gotta go see it. Science and spirituality finally merged. I'm going, yeah, really? He's going, no, go see it. I'm going, okay, I'll go see it. And so I went and saw it. I went back to see my friend Alberto, and I saw the movie. He goes, what do you think? I said, Steiner was right. I said, when mankind gets to the end of his descent beneath matter, he's going to end up with a vacant metaphysics. That's all that stuff is, right? It's like, but people think this whole wonder, it's like quantum this and quantum that. But quantum states is really, they're just subsensible mirror of what we see in the plant world, right? Like the quantum potential is the seed, right? And, we call it the valence activation and stuff, moving from valence to valence. That's like the leaves, right? That's the metamorphoses of the levels, right? Because they don't move in gradual stages. They metamorphose the different stages. And then you get to the reproduction stage, just like quantum superposition, because not only are you interacting with other plants, other beings at that time, but you're also interacting through the astral, right? Because plants don't have an astral. They've got, the physical and the etheric, but the astral interacts with them through their reproductive systems and the insects and the other parts of the biospheric environment. So that's a quantum superposition. And then, the quantum potentiality then of all the seeds, right? You got any of these seeds can do anything again, right? So all the stuff that they're talking about in the quantum realm actually exists within the natural world. So that's what I'm saying. You don't need to go to that. I even show my talk. I've got, CERN, I call it, it's like this subsensible, it's a temple of the subsensible. People worship that stuff. And what's it got? Sure, it gives us technology. It gives us technology we're communicating on, that level of science. But all of this technology is actually very damaging to our health, damaging to the biosphere, cutting us off from our cosmic roots in heaven, the etheric roots, right? We've got elemental roots into the ground and etheric roots up into the heavens. Yeah. And we think of that like a tree, right? Trees rooted in the ground and subject to that, right? Can't move around. But the upper part of the tree, it's subject to the constantly moving conditions, the basically daylight and nighttime, the lunar phases. Then we find out even bud shapes, through Lawrence Edwards' work with the moon and the outer planets control, like when the buds come into their most perfect shapes. There's all these other things. So the ethers are mobile. They're not fixed like the elements. So all modern science can do is look at the elements and keep going smaller and smaller, kind of smash them apart, extracting them into smaller pieces. And they've totally lost the irreducible wholeness and the secret of life, which supposedly is what initially started this whole thing on that search, right? So it's a metaphysical vacancy. Unless, of course, they're doing some weird ritualistic stuff and trying to contact other worlds and dark, which they've actually admitted in scientific journals and stuff. We're looking for this dark world, portal to other dimensions. I've got quotes from like the head of CERN on that stuff. So who knows what they're really doing? You can't trust them. So does NASA lie? On many things, yes. On the moon landings, yes. But there's some curious things, because it seemed like some of the moon landing stuff, they were actually looking for cosmic ray patterns and glass nodules they brought back. So there are some puzzles with it all.
Yeah. So the next
and
question,
certainly stuff moving around. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Next question is why? Why would they lie? Is it just maybe is it too much to explain to public consciousness? Is it because they want to withhold information that's valuable? And like, who are, maybe you do or don't have any insights into who are the actual arbiters of this information? Like
that. I wish I knew the answer to that, and I think I've been thinking about that for quite a few decades now. Well, one thing is it keeps a lock on the universe. And as we find out now, and it's coming through, I mean, I first learned this, going back into like the 70s and 80s, in the old Rosicrucian, my mentor, Riley Crabb, who I took over Borderland Sciences from, he's a great theosophist, ran a Theosophical Lodge in Honolulu in the 1950s before he came to the States to run Borderlands for 25 years. And he was into this whole thing, the precession of the equinoxes. We're at the end of this, the Aquarian age, but we had no physical data on that. We didn't know any of that stuff, right? We had this feeling that it was there. It was in the teachings. We knew about it. And I started looking into it when I took over Borderland, started getting into like the solar and geophysical data and looking at it. And I started realizing something happened basically perhaps in the 1940s, 1950s. Things started changing. Solar irradiance. So I started hypothesizing that something was coming from the galactic center, and at the forefront of the wave hit back then. And now there's a lot of, for me, it was just an intuitive thing, but now there's actually a lot of scientific data and many people doing this. The whole Suspicious Observers group and a number of other ones. First was probably Paulo LaViolette's work with his galactic superwave, and tying that in with John Jenkins. John Major Jenkins, did all that 2012 research. The late John Jenkins, he passed away in 2016, a great loss. I published his Tzolk'in Mayan calendar studies at Borderland in 1994. He came to me and said, look, I did this book, showing when the true Mayan end date is. It's the solstice, December 21st, 2012. Everybody's into Arguellas, and he's saying it's the 23rd. He said, but I've lived with Mayan daykeepers in Guatemala. I've got the data, and we published it. And that was the first paperback that was ever published with, he had done a staple-bound version earlier, but that was really the first correct astronomical data on that in the long count, which of course he came under attack from a lot of quarters because everybody had their own theory. But like I say, his was based on that. And it was probably about 6 months after the book was in print. And he got back to me, he's going, man, he goes, it's the end of the precessional cycle. He went on, because we knew about the dark rift and all that. And it finally dawned on him and everybody else that this was literally the end of the precessional cycle. And he did that book, Galactic Alignment, another one of my favorite books, seminal in there. And in there, he discusses things like what you got from Oliver Reiser's work, Cosmic Humanism, where like Earth, we're approximately 24 to 26,000 light years from the center of the galaxy. And our precessional cycle is keyed almost precisely to that and tied in. And Paul LaViolette was saying that, basically we're looking at, I think he used 23,000 years. So some variations on this, but they're all within that ballpark. So let's say 24,000 years of periodic galactic core eruptions, which come through, and all the ancient geological layers are based on this. So there's something big happening in the universe, and it's coming in now. There's no doubt. The sun's changing. The helium activity on the sun's changed. You'd have to go to like Suspicious Observer. They've got a whole video series on this.
Is there something with like Birkeland currents? I think it was Susan Manwich was telling me something about Birkeland currents. Does that kind of play into it at all?
Yeah, well, the Birkeland currents are like the star-forming regions in space. In fact, because I've been to Walter Cruttenden's work on, Sol, our sun, and Sirius being in a binary orbit, the whole great year thing, because that all came out. There's all these little pieces all fit together on this. But then there's this wonderful YouTube channel I recommend people check out. It's called See the Pattern. You should interview that guy. He's fantastic. And he's done all the stuff on, he says that Sirius and Sun are in a Birkeland current going around each other, and he's tied all this in. This is what's actually moving everything through space. So yeah, the Birkeland currents are what forms the stars and feeds them and moves us all through space. This is all, essential electric universe. Walt Thornhill's work on electric stars. I wish I could absorb all this. I'm more like a librarian of, what all these things. I know where all the pieces are. It's more from, I wish I could pull them all in. I've studied all these. I've read them. I've watched the videos, but I don't have instant recall. Especially my mind's not as sharp as it was years ago, where I used to have total recall on all this stuff. But like trying to remember Giovanni Riccioli's name earlier, the Jesuit guy that, apply. That pops in later, right? It always comes up at some point. The Jesuit polymath that put the elliptical curves into Tycho's work, and then the whole universe works out properly. The geocentric model.
Yeah. And then we have this like Neil deGrasse Tyson guy, which I'm not really a fan of personally, but he describes the shape of the Earth as like more oblong. Do you feel like that's a reasonable contention, or how spherical is there from what you've gathered, is it like pretty darn spherical? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. It's easily determined. In fact, there's some scientific things set up on this. Is there Earth rotation services? All this stuff is available. Yeah, well, his thing was taken out of context, and I think he's pretty much of a clown scientism spokesperson like Einstein was and Sagan. It's kind of funny now. People have been posting for months this whole thing about Sagan's quote about, got to be careful about being befuddled by people. But he was a great befuddler himself. He got his standing because he attacked Velikovsky's work, right? The catastrophism. That's one of the things they're covering up. The powers that be know there's big catastrophes coming. And if we look at the various sort of fields, and it's very possible somewhere between 2040 and 2050, we're going to see a magnetic incursion, we can call it, a polar shift, and a solar micronova, and potentially, 90% plus of the biosphere is going to be wiped out and reset. And the powers that be know this. That's why they've been building big underground. Richard Sauter's work years ago, I helped him publish his first book on the underground bases and tunnels years ago. He wanted me to publish it to get royalties. I said, publish it yourself. I'll give you a free ad. And I taught him how to publish his books. But all those underground bases, that's all this black money going into there. And they've got undersea bases that'll hold like 10 giant nuclear subs and stuff. I mean, there's so much stuff out there people don't know. And they want to argue like Trump versus Biden and stuff. It's all a show out there.
Yeah.
So, people go, what do you think about this stuff? I said, it's a great distraction.
100%.
What about the real world? What's really happening out there? I think that's one thing I've been fortunate in the past. I was able to be in touch with and come across all these great researchers that were, Borderland was a real magnet for that stuff. And since then, I've done that. Now I work with a group more loosely knit called Ether Force. You may have seen them. AET.
Oh, yeah. He's cool.
And you should. Yeah. Now there's another gentleman you should interview. I think he's way beyond where I'm at.
Actually, I need to interview him, and we've talked before about doing an interview, so I'm definitely gonna have to get him on. Yeah.
No, it's guys like him is the reason I did what I did. Yeah. So that next generation, and there's more. We've got private Telegram group. There's a public Telegram group, which is more of a shit show, but the private group is more onto it. And we've got Curtian science groups and the stuff where people are actually into this stuff, discuss it, and nothing else.
Yeah.
The shape of the Earth is very easily determined, but there's more to it. I actually wrote a paper years ago. I had a vision of the four worlds, basically back in California, I would say circa 1990, when I was running Borderlands. I can't remember the exact year, but I was reading this book on the Tychonian universe, right? De Labore Solis, or Ares Failure Reconsidered. And that was all about, these ether drift experiments, Fitzo and Michelson-Morley and Oliver Lodge, and how they couldn't measure the ether. So therefore, Earth wasn't orbiting. So it was basically based on, it was a geocentrism book. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm thinking of that. And I've been reading Koresh around the inside. And of course, I've been into the Kabbalah since much younger, the four worlds. And I was sitting out in my garden one day, meditating. I was going, I wonder what the world would feel like if we were in the center. It was like this most amazing feeling came over. Everything was alive, right? It was just this beautiful California day, the sun and the clouds, and up in the biodynamic garden in the Northland Woods, Humboldt County. It's just like, wow, everything felt so alive from the sun on down. I'm going, it would feel just like this. I am in the center. What the hell? And I had this flash. We're living in four worlds, right? The four worlds, right? The heliocentric, the geocentric, the concave, and the flat, right? The archetypal. That's, so I forget the Hebrew names. They'll probably pop in when we're done talking.
We're in Malkuth of Asaya, I think. Right?
What's it?
I think we're in Malkuth of Asaya.
Yeah. This one, right? Because there's the four worlds, or the four trees. I dropped a lot of that stuff when I found Goethe. I mean, when I was younger, I was corresponding with Kenneth Grant for many years, right? Who was the head of the OTO. And I was studying under Michael Berdio in Chicago, right? He was Ordo Templi Orientis Antique, and studying to be a Gnostic priest in the whole liberal Catholic Church. But then I got into the borderland stuff, and it was like, yeah, no, I'm kind of over that stuff. It's interesting, but it's going nowhere. It's a great archetype. Yeah. And I kept in touch with, Berdio got pissed off when I got into the Goethean stuff. For some reason, I didn't want to talk to me anymore, but Kenneth Grant did. I kept in touch with him for years. And I really loved his work, even though I didn't agree with it. It was very dark and subterranean in a sense, but it was artistic, right? I mean, it's like I've lived light and dark. I've lived on the streets. I was in the rock and roll world and did all that crazy stuff when I was young. All at the same time, going to Shinto temples to pray and Buddhist meditations. It's good to have a little bit of both in your life.
Yeah, I wonder, do you feel like your kind of ceremonial magic explorations laid a good groundwork, foundation for you to be able to sort of conceptualize and cognize a lot of your modern spiritual practice and contemplating things like, understanding Goethe or the Tibetan mysticism or four worlds or Kabbalah and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I never disregarded it. I just never pursued it all that much. I mean, but I actually did in 1983, which was before I went to Borderland. I was in Chicago at the time, from 83 to 84. I was from 80. So I grew up in Chicago, and I was kind of bouncing back and forth in the early 80s between California and Chicago. And I was in Chicago. I had this vision of Hollow Earth and the Kabbalah, right? I was studying all the Hollow Earth books. I love that stuff too. Raymond Bernard's book, which of course had a lot of flaws, but it was a good sort of intro, all those health research books, and Edda Dorfa. Fantastic stuff. So I actually came up with a Hollow Earth Kabbalah, where it's a Hollow Earth Kabbalah with the mandala and orgone physics and all that stuff was all tied in on one diagram.
Does that include the Qliphoth? Was that what that's called?
Yeah, that was the inside. Yeah. The Qliphoth was the Hollow Earth, right? Yeah. That was the mirror tree. I'll send the thing to you. It was actually, I actually sent that to Riley Crabb. And he's going, he goes, that was fantastic stuff. He said, but I think Crowley had it with hate it by the time he got hold. Anyway, but that was sort of my introduction to Riley Crabb. He's going, when I saw that, he said, I knew that you were on the right track. He said, but you just needed some more education in the processes. But Riley wasn't into the Goethean stuff. I got that from Trevor.
Trevor Constable?
Yeah. Riley wanted me to still keep following more of the old theosophical. But as I found out, I mean, if you read The Elder Brother by Tillage, I think was his name, on Berdio, I mean, he was basically a black magician pedophile. That's where he was getting all his, if you look at all the science of the sacraments and how, they construct the proper church with the dome and all that from going through the mass properly. He's talking about how at night they would roll the scroll up and run it back and forth until they would find the imperfections. And he's basically describing in allegorical terms what he was doing to the young boys. People wonder why Krishnamurti almost vomit when they mentioned Leadbeater's name around him, right?
Yeah.
Because he was sick of that shit that happened when he was young. And there was that whole, and all the theosophists, they never believed that stuff. Annie Besant spent a lot of time covering up. And you should read that book. I mean, The Elder Brother. I mean, there's I think one chapter's in there is where Leadbeater Bishops, the Sydney police investigating. Him and Bishop Wedgwood, they get arrested loitering around men's toilets and stuff in public parks. It's these guys, God, but they did come up with a lot of interesting stuff. I think guys like Jeffrey Hodgson were much more on the light side of that. And I got that, but I mean, Trevor was always saying, and I remember when Bird and Tompkins came out with their Secrets of the Soil, which was their sequel to The Secret Life of plants. And I wrote a review on that, and I actually criticized where they were comparing theosophy and Leadbeater's vision, because Leadbeater, right, subsensible, what's he seeing? He's seeing quarks and stuff, right?
Mm.
He's looking beneath matter using pedophilic black magic and seeing quarks. The verification of that process, right? Meanwhile, Steiner's stuff looking above it and seeing the ethers and what's happening. I mean, Trevor doing his weather engineering with that, the profound verification of the higher realms and that approach. And, so I was able to see those two sides, and I kind of mentioned that in a basic, polite way. And Chris Bird actually got pissed off at me. He wrote me an upset letter that I didn't understand the theosophical stuff, even though I had studied it for years. And I used to go to the theosophical book and ask them if they had any books on Crowley just to piss him off when I was a teenager, right? And not knowing it would razz him. Probably when I was tripping too. We were real troublemakers back in those days.
Good times.
Yeah. But no, that's it. And I think, but I was at this one biodynamic conference. It might have been Hugh Lovell, I think, came up to me. One guy, I remember he was a big, tall guy with a beard, and he comes up to me. He goes, "You're the guy that wrote that review of Secrets of the Soil." I'm going, "Yeah." He's going, spot on. He goes, "I'm glad somebody gets it."
No.
Because that's it. In Secrets of the Soil, he had that whole thing in there on the, what was it? Again, the name escapes me. But where they're doing the sound with hydroponics, right? I'm going, what's that doing in Secrets of the Soil? They're not using any soil. Not that the stuff wasn't interesting, using the insect chirps and bird sounds, which are essential to the plant, but they're doing it in hydroponics, which is disconnection from the soils.
Mm.
And of course, as we've later learned in the mycelium networks and stuff. But nonetheless, and this is what I mean by new organs of cognition, your worldview. So you start getting these bigger ideas, and they become like organs of cognition to process new ideas as they come into you.
Yeah.
So if I hadn't had that, if I would have read Secrets of the Soil before I'd met Trevor and known all that stuff, I never would have made that same connection. I wouldn't have been able to see the difference.
Yeah.
Between those ideas.
I love the geometry of things too. It seems like it really helps to understand a lot of like deep concepts and stuff. And there was something I was watching recently. I think it was Professor Keith Critchlow or something. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, but he describes a lot of like sacred geometry type stuff, and he was going over the heptagram, and because you can lay that out and describe the different 7 major planetary bodies. And then it was just fascinating because he was linking and talking about how just different ways of doing the heptagram. You can going from starting at one sign or one planet counterclockwise, and then in reality the speeds of the planet are corresponded, kind of like within the Chaldean order and whatnot. And then not only the speeds of the planets, but there's correspondences between the atomic numbers and atomic weights of things in accordance to how it lays over on the heptagram. And then you can divide things and create like the Mercury symbol out of it. And then something about like the proportionality and Mercury in relation to the whole or something is like determines the distance from the planets. And it was just all based on this geometry. I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing.
No, I've come across his name and I've seen that, but I haven't delved into it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I think, and that's what, we need some like new foundation that's actually looking into all these things. I suppose that was in many ways a great loss in my life, was losing Borderland, because I was trying to expand it and it fell apart. As I moved to New Zealand, I was trying to turn an international thing, but unfortunately human nature took over people and it didn't. But the whole idea was to basically have all these ideas available, and there are a lot of people doing it, and the internet gives us that to a certain extent, but it's also shortened people's sort of attention spans.
Yes.
And how we can basically process this data and do it. No, but we'll look into Keith Critchlow. I am familiar with the name, but I haven't totally delved. I know there's all sorts of layers that we can bring into this. I've just tried to bring this basic thing in.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say, right, see, because the anthropocentric world, right? So here we are, we know from the Callisto stuff and Auguste Piccard's work, not Auguste Piccard, what was the other names? Picardi, the Italian scientist.
Giorgio Picardi?
Giorgio Picardi. Yeah, with his work showing that, the change rate in chemical reactions in colloidal solutions dependent on solar activity, geomagnetic activity, as well as Earth's orientation to the center of the galaxy, right? And of course, we're made out of all this stuff, right? So all this stuff's constantly, and that's why I've been looking into like the radioactive decay rates, solar rotation, and Earth's orbit, as well as, and what's interesting, as well as geomagnetic and cosmic ray activity, which would, of course, would all tie in with all that, you're looking at from the subsensible and the supersensible. But the thing is like with Picardi's stuff and with these radioactive decay rates, they're getting stronger readings inside Faraday cages.
Whoa.
Which in a sense is counterintuitive because they should be shielding that stuff out, shouldn't it?
Interesting.
Well, because it's working on the etheric, right? The etheric, as Trevor said, right? Because when I remember when he made this like, we called the Spider, his very first Spider machine that he used for like weather engineering and eventually used for smog control. And when first time he ran it going into Hawaii on the SS Maui, he said he ran it inside the hold. He ran it inside. He didn't take it out because I guess they were building it in the machine shop and they just ran it in there. And basically they created a storm coming in. He said, even though this thing was just like little metal cones, sacred geometric cones spinning on this little device, it was almost as if this 12-inch plate steel was invisible to it, right? Because the geometry was affecting the ethers and it was affecting the weather. And he brought a storm into Honolulu as they were coming in with this thing inside a giant metal ship. And he's done that too in the airborne etheric weather engineering, when they got a little, sacred geometric tube basically tied onto an airplane strut, right? It's plastic and metal. And what's the plane made out of? Metal and plastic. And they just tie this little tube on, fly for 20 minutes, and on a clear day, it starts raining. Right? Well, how come the airplane doesn't do that normally? And they've actually done it with the thing inside the plane as well. It's like, well, what the hell? How come radioactive decay rates are being affected by cosmic ray changes, solar activity changes, inside a Faraday cage, as well as, and there's another thing we didn't mention, the deep Earth biosphere, which is electrogenic in nature and is affected by geomagnetic and solar and cosmic ray activity, which is probably driving earthquake activity and tectonic activity and all that. It's a much bigger living Earth. But I didn't finish one point I want to finish, the anthropocentric. So we know from Lily Callisto's, it's affecting us. Picardi's, it's affecting us. The cosmological botany, it's affecting the plant morphology. But also then the four worlds, right? The heliocentric, like our bones. It's not deep inside. The geocentric, that's this magic fleshy thing we have on top, and that's our experiential reality. That's what we're doing. And then I remember talking with Eric Dollard, probably like 35, 40 years ago, I was asking him about the concave Earth. He said, if the Earth isn't that way, he said the energy components will be. And I've thought about that, and that's basically how stellar light transmits, right? We started getting into the no stars in space. We didn't follow that because all of these things are big rabbit holes. Stellar light transmission, basically it appears on the outside of the atmosphere. The eye's conditioned to it apparently after a while. And I talked to an astronaut, said, no, he goes, look, when I went up there, well, first of all, I talked to a guy who worked for the photographic department, told me when they first went up, Alan Shepard, John Glenn. So it's a big puzzle, right? Space was black, right? So they started developing these specialized diffraction gratings, he said, so they could start seeing larger order light sources. And he said, but I don't know where that project went. He says, because everything was so compartmentalized. But I talked to an astronaut, John Bartow, who was up on the first Challenger flight and spacewalked and did solar research. I go, yeah, well, NASA's telling me can't see stars in space. He said, no, they're brighter in space than they are on Earth, and they don't twinkle because of the atmosphere. I'm going, well, great. So I call back my contact in NASA. He's going, well, he's a trained observer, and he would have accurately reported his observations. He said, but the information we've been giving you is correct. So I figured by the time these astronauts go up, they can see the stars. Now on ISS, they've taken pictures of stars, but they never took any pictures of stars or planets or the moon from the ISS. Right? Never, ever. Like, hey, we're out in space. Look, there's the moon right over there. Never, ever, ever. And you'd see it rise. Every now and then you see a little bit of the moon against the horizon. But never do they show it freely in space. It's like, well, what the hell's really going on with it all? Who really knows? So the energetic component is we're on the inside energetically. That's the etheric functions like that. That's the counterspatial. And all of that together is the archetypal, which is the mandala, the flat plane. And in this, the flat earthers, I had a friend that got into flat earth, and I talked her out of it. I explained to her, I didn't talk her out of it. I started showing her all the experiments. She's going, no, she says, no, I get it. She goes, but what was weird? She said, when I thought the world was flat, she goes, this most amazing feeling came over me that I never felt before. And I go, yeah, no, I felt that. I said, that's what those occult, spooky psychologists at the alphabet agencies, they've short-circuited this. This is the knowledge of the archetypal plane, but they short-circuited it, using psyop techniques. So you think it's the physical reality, right? So you get locked into it. That's what they've actually done to it. And it prevents people from, seeing the higher realms out of that. And so that's true. So that is because in projective geometry, which is how all geometry works in objective space, right? The 3D coordinate system is us. Steiner said that was a grave error of humanity's descent beneath matter, was the removal of the 3D proprioceptive nature of humanity externally as a metric of space. Because you can wave around, there's no 3D out here. There's one dimension, space. And how does that operate on projective geometry? And in projective geometry, point and a plane are the two polarities mediated by a line. So a point, if you can get closer and closer to it, or like a balloon, you can blow it up and keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger. It doesn't have to get that big. You can cut out flat tabletop out of it, right? And to get some of the size of the Earth, when you look at the magnitude, and that's what I'm saying, look at a protractor. You look at 1 degree on a protractor, which is a tiny little speck, that's 70 miles, 69 miles or 70 miles, 111 kilometers. And you start realizing, a few hundred miles, you're not looking that much. So this formula that the flat earthers use, this 8 inches squared per mile, that's for the sighting line perpendicular to the plumb line. And that goes out in space where the line of sight goes down. And this is where the confusion comes. This is how they trick you, right? And I know, because I've put myself, I've meditated through I've lived in all 4 of those worlds. And I wrote a paper on it, the Archecosmos, which is on my thomasbrown.org site. I've sent numerous flat earthers there to read it. None of them have. I said, I'm happy to have a discussion once you read it. And I'll be rewriting that in more revised portions on my alchemics.art Substack as time goes on. I want to kind of perfect that and bring more of these ideas. So that's it. So now we live in 4 worlds, but we're centered within this whole milieu of all of these things happening out there. So yeah, that's to me the anthropocentric world. That's my spiritual proprioceptivity with mountains of scientific data and philosophical stuff to tie in.
And within your article that you were writing about the anthroposophical universe, one of the bullet points on there, I think it said the alchemy of space. Was that a little bit of what you were just speaking to, or?
That's what I was speaking of with the 4 worlds, and the transformation. Because what is alchemy really? I mean, there's this sort of standard conception of alchemy outside of the Muggles, which is perfection. Like I say, spagyric formulas, working through trying to perfect the stone. But then there's sort of the spiritual nature. But then we look at like what they call Taoist alchemy, which is really the perfection, the microcosmic orbit until you awaken the cosmos within, and then seal it off, right? And then when you die, you birth your new self out the top, because you basically distilled your experiences through all that. And that's what Mantak Chia says, when you perfect the microcosmic orbit, he says you're no longer influenced by your astrology, right? Because the cosmos is now within you, under your control. So so there's different things of alchemy. So in that sense, yes, it's the transformation of space. It's a transformation of one state to the other. Being able to move from the heliocentric to the geocentric, then to the concave, both physically and energetically, to understand these, and then to the flat. But understanding the flat is a plane at infinity, and all planes at infinity are sections of spheres at infinity. So this brings in, there's a lot more ramifications, but yes, that's where I was going with that. And that's why I say I've got to re-explain those articles more in detail. Well, I still have time.
Yeah, for sure. With something like radioactive decay, this is something I've attempted to understand better, and I'm trying to work through it. But I wonder, do radioactive decay rates fluctuate depending on like planetary or astronomical positioning or influence?
I'm delving into that. Well, definitely they happen along with solar activity. And of course, we know from John Nelson's work that we get certain solar activity based on planetary positions. So there's indications of that, yes. And it's interesting because you look at, like, what was his name, Gauquelin, the man who did the scientific basis, the Mars stuff with athletes, with the rising signs. Are you familiar with his work at all? The scientific basis of astrology, which he pissed off everybody, physicists and astrologers, because for one thing, he was showing statistical analysis of like politicians and Jupiter rising and athletes and Mars rising. I can't remember all the details. It's been many years since I've read that, but just in general, I understand it as a librarian. I know where to look. But his position was, what pissed off the astrologers, it didn't matter what house they were in. He thought that was he couldn't find any statistical analysis that made any difference. And of course, we've got the different systems, the sidereal and tropical. But the positions themselves and interactions, as Kalisko showed, right? The Kalisko experiments didn't seem to matter what house the stuff was in. It's where the planets were in relation to Earth or in relation to the sun. So if we look at John Nelson's radio astronomy with RCA, that was planetary positions with the sun. If we look at Kalisko, it was planetary positions with the Earth. They're both real. They're both functioning. So you can't say one's one and one's the other.
Definitely.
The anthropocentric includes both of them. It has to by its very nature.
Yeah. And in regards to George Sanak's interferometry experiments, I think it was him. He carried out some experiment that produced something called interference fringes. Was that correct?
Sagnac. Well, the interference fringes go through all of the ether drift experiments. It was like Fizeau and stuff. Originally, they have like these tubes, like a U-shaped tube, and they split a light beam through it, but the light beam splits with mirrors, so it's going both directions through the tube. And then they have optical fringes to see if the water is making, pulling the light one way or the other, so that if there's no ether drag, the fringes will be in line. But if there's an ether drag going one direction, which they did find minor stuff, right? That's for the whole history, but they were trying to basically find it more. And that's what the Michelson, Morley, Oliver Lodge, all of these guys, they had these big rotating mirrors. They have like a big granite slab rotating on a Mercury, and with crisscross optical fringes. And depending on which way the Earth was moving, that supposedly they could measure the ether. As Earth moved through the ether, they were going to see how that affected the speed of light. And of course, they say, well, Michelson, Morley, they couldn't find any. Well, that's not true. They did find it. It was just much less than what they expected. But part of the reason was they were using giant heavy equipment down in basements, right, where the ether is like more up. Eventually, Dayton Miller measured it more properly up on Mount Wilson back in like 1920s or 1930s. So what Sagnac was doing, he was working on, following off from like the Michelson-Gale experiments. So Michelson-Morley, they couldn't really measure the Earth's orbit, but they easily measured Earth's rotation using a different thing, the Michelson-Gale interferometry sort of process. So rather than having stuff crisscrossing in the middle, they had it going around a big sort of rectangle. And Sagnac did the same similar type of experimentation, you know, where they're, and they actually use Sagnac's work. They actually have navigational compass devices based on this, right? Because they can, you know, tell where Earth's rotation is and how it's going. And that's another thing with the flat earthers. I mean, all the big ships are basically use navigational compasses, which are based on Earth's rotation. It's like you can't get around this stuff. No matter where you look, it's there. It depends on how far you want to look. You know, if you want to pull up, I'll go, look, here's a bad sort of video of me zooming in on a boat that sort of I couldn't see optically. That proves it, right? It's like, well, you know, there's a lot of different conditions out there, refraction and all of that. And that's why it was great working with a geodetic surveyor for a few years and really learning all of the different parameters that they look into in doing that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it. So, and that's what the geocentrist, Rick Delano, who's passed away, I think last year or so, and he did those things, Journey to the Center of the Universe, which is like the principle they did on the, you know, basically geocentrism, and then they did a longer one, 4-hour one, where they actually review all these experiments, and they claim that Earth is geocentric because it's not orbiting the sun, because they're not measuring enough of an ether, but it is either Earth is rotating or the ether is rotating around the Earth, which is the same according to Mach's principle. That's indeterminate, which is true according to physical parameters. So they say, well, it's obviously the universe is rotating around this fixed Earth, but they use it as an argument. And it's funny because they leave a bit of information out in their long dialogues. Because they mentioned Dayton Miller, but they failed to mention his later experiments that actually verified the motion of the Earth. So yeah, there's a lot to that in consideration. So it's good stuff to actually consider and thinking about all of this. It all needs to be reviewed, you know, from a spiritual science perspective. So for me, spiritual science isn't about talking to archangels and, you know, trying to find out, you know, if it's Michael or one of his other archangels is ruling this age and all. Yeah, that's cute stuff, and I'm glad people are into it. It really does nothing for me. I just find it interesting. It's like, give me some more of this data from the natural scientific section. These guys, like Theodore Schwenk, right, who wrote Sensitive Chaos and the basis of potentization research, right? What they were doing is he was basically taking purified distilled water, and every 2 hours through the day is they basically they shake the water, okay, and then set it there. And then they do it again. Not the same water, but a separate water. So I forget how many they did, 6 or 8 a day. And then they're sprouting plants with this water and measuring the sprout rates and measuring it against sort of planetary positions. And, you know, like they found like some dramatic sort of effects during a solar eclipse before and after. Because Kalisko was finding that before and after the solar eclipse, they were doing that. And they've actually found that in the variable decay rates and like medical isotopes is before a solar flare, you know, like 24 hours before the rate starts decaying, before the flare actually happens, right? So there's event horizons around these things. But one of the important things about this variable stuff, because a lot of people these days are into the Planck, right? The Planck, the smallest little thing where space is digitized. Allegedly, right? To me, the Planck is a mathematical fudge factor in order to make the modern paradigm work mathematically, but it's not the nature of space. There's no evidence that space is actually quantized. And of course, people are doing all this Planck scaling and all of this stuff, won't mention any names coming off of it, and it's like, and that's supposed to be the new science. It's like, well, this stuff may not even exist, right? If we look at the reasonings of how these things were developed. And but the fact that you have variable decay rates means that the Planck is variable. So how can you actually do a scaling into various parameters? And one researcher is actually claiming that the Planck scaling proves photosynthesis, right? He gives the rates for like absorption rates for photosynthesis A and photosynthesis B. I'm going, that's my field. I looked into it. He was so wrong. It was like wacky. I actually wrote back to the guy on a couple of forums and said, well, where do you get your numbers? This stuff's not even working. So like tried to block me and deleted my posts and stuff. Because people don't want to believe this crazy stuff. Yeah. And not that there is anything to it, but it's the sub-sensible realm. They say, you know, for me, the spiritual science of the future is the super sensible. You know, it's that which is above the senses. But we can train our senses to see that through these higher organs of cognition developed to the Goethean approach to natural processes. And even, what was his name? Schellberger. Let me see if I find, I want to read this one quote from Schellberger. I think, do I even have it? I love this quote from Schellberger because this actually ties in totally with the Goethean process and everything. And Schellberger says, totally oblivious, I let the water flow past my searching eyes, and only years later did I become aware that this running water attracts our consciousness magnetically, takes a piece with it, a force that is so strong that one loses consciousness for a while and involuntarily falls into a deep sleep. And so gradually I began to play with these forces in water, and I gave up this so-called free consciousness and left it to the water for a while. Little by little, this game turned into a very serious matter because I saw that it was possible to release my own consciousness from my body and attach it to the water. When I took it back again, the consciousness borrowed from the water told me things that were often very strange. And so the searcher became a researcher who could send his consciousness on expeditions, so to speak. And this I found out about things the rest of mankind has missed because they do not know that people are able to send their free consciousness everywhere, even where the seeing eye cannot look. So in essence, he was a Goethean, right? Whether or not, we know Tesla was a Goethean. He never mentioned Goethe's light and color, which I think actually helps explain the Tesla physics. But he certainly mentioned his work and was very into it, which influenced his whole design of like the rotating magnetic field and the alternators and everything. So obviously there's a higher approach that can go through this, but people have to make sure they don't wander into the ungrounded metaphysical side. You know, that's my take. Yeah, people are welcome to go where they want. I'm just expressing my opinion.
Yeah.
Remember long ago, I was arguing with a friend over something, and she goes, you know, you always think you're right. I said, yeah, well, everybody does. I said, but right now I am. And you're upset about it. I said, but I'm not always right. I said, if you had a better point than me, I would listen to it, right? And I've also told people, I said, well, I actually love arguing. And a friend said, well, I don't like it when emotion enters it. Mm-hmm. I said, argument is a mathematical term. I said, when emotion enters it, we call it stupidity. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So that's my philosophy on that, right? It's like all of these points are up. And on this picture behind me, right, this colored bookshelf here, this is Bill Corliss's source book project. Now, and Bill was one of my mentors. I corresponded with him for years and talked to him on the phone because he lived on the East Coast. I lived on the West. And I wanted to bring him out to California for a talk. He goes, what would I talk about? I don't have anything to talk about. I'm going, right, he was beyond Charles Fort in categorizing anomalies, all based on scientific data. The Sourcebook Project, one of the finest resources you can get for, pursuing this line. I've been able to get most of these on PDF now, which just isn't the same. But especially my favorite, I used to call it my favorite bedtime reading because it'll put you to sleep quick. It was called Neglected Geological Anomalies.
Oh, yeah.
And if you ever thought that modern geological science has the answers, it's like, these guys, then it's like upside down, missing strata. God, there's just so many. The whole, everything. And that's what you're asking, why would NASA lie? Why would powers of be lie? Why would they try to make people stupid in school? Not allow them to think properly, because it frees the soul. And it removes them from power. So a free world, I mean, I envisioned a world, where people were free. And even Tesla to a certain extent, but he was a bit of a mechanist, right? He wanted to light the atmosphere so we didn't need street lights. So it'd just be bright all the time, so he could keep on working because he didn't sleep. So, I mean, there's a bit of madness to him, but at the same time, we have his worldwide wireless right now, which was non-electromagnetic. So we didn't need wires. It wasn't harmful to the system. It was actually healing. We would have an incredible world, so totally different than the one we have now. And that was like, 110, 120 years ago, he was ready to gift this to the world. So we're living in a degenerate, decaying thing at the tail end of the Kali Yuga. It's a mad world. There's a galactic superwave coming in, ready to flip it all over and exchange it. Whether we have the collective mental power to change it, perhaps we do, but whether that's achievable at present because one of the things in anthroposophy and in other spiritual traditions like theosophy, they talk about this coming discovery of the fifth chamber of the heart and the heart becoming conscious. And of course, Steiner said the fifth chamber of the heart is the pericardium, right? And we look in what are the spike proteins from the jabs actually affect, right? They go straight to the pericardial tissue, and there's always pericarditis and myocarditis. It's almost like that stuff was designed, like Steiner said, there'll be a vaccine which will prevent spiritual process. So the people who are doing this, they're, whether there's some perverted matoids at the top or there's dark spiritual forces, however they're manifesting through these people, I don't know. I suspect the latter, because who knows where anything comes from. And if you've ever done anything like DMT or ayahuasca, there's other realms. Yep. And which I've done both. I've done a lot of both over the years. I don't really care anymore, because I've been there, done that. And some of the most profound visions I've had have been through meditations on the mandala, because we are the mandala, right? We look at the Tibetan mandala, and it's I have one right here. Let me see if I can pull this without knocking all my prisms over. Yeah, the mandala.
Oh, yeah.
And this is my version of it, because I always like my versions of stuff.
I love your version.
And it's slightly reversed, well, because I live in the southern hemisphere. So everything moves differently here, sundials and everything. So it reversed it if I was living. But anyway, right, the blue section, that's like the entry, Akshobhya, right, the unmovable Buddha, and that's the Vajra. So that's the entrance way, and that's the mirror-like wisdom, right? The inside and the outside worlds have to reflect each other perfectly. And that's why, if you're into quantum stuff and all that, into the subsensible, well, how in the hell is that going to, what does it have to do with the inside? And this is why people are coming up with all this simulation stuff, because there's these distortions in the field, in the collective. That's why I like the natural sciences. I want to know exactly what's happening in natural processes, like Goethe and Schauberger and Steiner all pointed to, and I've experienced to a certain extent. So that's the first one. But then the second one is then, the yellow field. It's funny because I've got a green screen.
Oh, yeah.
They disappear. Put it at the top. There we go. And that's sensation. So that's all the energy coming in. So the first one is our form, right? The skandhas, the aggregates of consciousness. We have form, sensation, cognition, and volition. And those are the four stages of the mandala. So form is the blue, sensation is this, cognition is this, and volition is this. So we come in here, we enter through the mirror-like wisdom. Then this is, the wisdom of equality, the spiritual, the true spiritual light, which shines on everybody, which, so these are stages you follow. And then Amitabha in the Western lands, for the more simpler versions, Western land schools and stuff, that's cognition. And then the Amoghasiddhi, right, the all-accomplishing karma-free action, that you've actually worked through this, and then you attain the center, which is Vairochana, right, the totality of consciousness. So these are not, the mandala is like a multidimensional mnemonic. It's us, right? We're the form, right? We've got to connect, right? We've got the internal side of the Vajra and the external side. So the mandala is around us, and that's what I'm saying. Yes, I started with the the banishing ritual of the pentagram, but that was my first sort of work with the mandala, and then I would have like the 4 elements below me, and the 6-point star above me, which is actually in the center of here, but you can't see it on here. I'll get more into that, which is the Dinsha spectrochrome system, which is actually I didn't write. I've got some articles in process, which will be coming out over the next few weeks. I've got a lot on because coming up to the Magical Egypt Summit, I'm doing a talk on this, and we'll get into a lot more of the scientific stuff. We talked in general, but I'll be showing charts and diagrams and pictures, and do another one with Gary Osborne and Ike Rodriguez, both brilliant guys, on Earth tilt and its effect on consciousness, and is it freeing us or enslaving us? And it's going to be like a esoteric think tank. So beyond that, I've got a whole series of articles lined up, for that, and start doing online workshops, which I'll let you know. You've always got a scholarship for that. You've been a wonderful conversationalist, and I'll let you know so you can tap in when we do these. And so I've got a lot on. I'm just trying to figure out how to make a living on it in the modern world, because most of my life I've run jobs, run companies, and done stuff and done all this work for free, but those days don't really happen anymore so much. So So anyway, I feel like I could keep pursuing business. I thought, no, this is, I'm aging, hopefully not that fast, but I'm 67 now, and I'd like to think I can make 100, but according to some of these dating things, the earth is going to roll when I'm somewhere getting up around 90. So I'd like to be sitting on the beach with a Mai Tai and a nice pair of sunglasses when that happens. So ready for the Bardo realms. Always approach it with a good spirit. So anyway, that's kind of me these days. I always love having these conversations, Sky, because I don't have them too much locally. It's only when I get online. And
I'm
really
honored.
Appreciate.
And definitely appreciate it. Do you have time for one more question?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
I was curious, obviously you're fascinated by everything. And being the librarian that you are, I wonder if you've come across Enochian, this language of Enochian, and has to do with John Dee, Edward Kelly, all that stuff. And then not only from maybe a magical or angelic sort of side of things, but perhaps any military applications or anything that you've come across, just anything interesting. I'm curious your whole take on Enochian. And
Well, I've been familiar with John Dee's work since I was young. Come across that early on in the Western mystery tradition. And then, of course, find him in certain conspiratorial trends. And then there was even Vincent Bridges. I'm not familiar with him. He's passed away, but he was in Prague. And he did this wonderful lecture, which you still find online, about John Dee and Shakespeare and all this alchemical stuff that was going on in Prague. And there's so many different angles on this. That the Enochian language for sure. And I'm trying to think of that book that Crowley had. I used to have it, but I sold my Crowley collection off for good money. I had like a lot of original editions and stuff, but at some point I decided that was it. And in one way I regretted it, but in another way I was like, it's like I made tens of thousands of dollars. First editions, Magic and Theory and Practice. I had 2 copies of the Paris folios and stuff, but after a while, I just didn't care. I just kept the Kenneth Grant books because I liked those, and he was a friend. But the Enochian, something about the ethers. God, I can't think of the name of the book, but he did that one thing with. He went through the desert in Africa with Victor Newberg or something, and they did this whole invocation of the ethers based on Enochian. So I was familiar with that, and I've heard rumors. I've heard people say, on different talks, that they think that there are people, especially perhaps some of the people into remote viewing and things, that there is people within the upper echelons or secret branches of the intelligence services that are using Enochian magic and are following this, because there is a logic to the language. There is something very interesting to it. So that would not surprise me, but I have no direct evidence of it. But certainly there's a lot of weird stuff going on inside that we have no idea. We know a lot of these guys are ceremonial magicians, and a lot of the so-called random events that we see around the world are basically ritualistic psyops, and you can see the signs. And I won't mention some of the recent ones where I've actually just was watching a video before we got on. Somebody sent me people giving all these, like, basically in Hawaii, of all these really weird hand signs while they're giving like the press conferences. It's like, right?
That was going to be my last question for you. I was going to ask you about your perspective on any modern day events that may have involved directed energy weapons. Do you think there's any valid claims to that? I don't know if you've explored direct energy weapon technology much, or how they
certainly.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the crop circles are basically they've been using the masers up there for years, for decades. The crop circles are these spooky occult scientists, probably guys that are into Enochian and stuff, and they make these symbols in the fields using their masers and stuff, right? If you follow the whole line of it, I've been into this since the 80s. Jerry Decker, the guy that founded KeelyNet, who was a good friend, he's passed away 2016. Yeah, I had three good friends sort of left in 2016. John Jenkins, Jerry Decker, and I forget the other guy's name now. Pop back to me. The guy that made the first biofeedback devices. I said, yeah, don't grow old. Your mind starts slipping. You got too many facts in there. But yeah, Jerry's telling me, because he thought, well, maybe it's infrared lasers. He said they're writing them like copy machines. And people go, well, yeah, well, leave good, right? They're doing experiments and they've seen lights and they've seen stuff. And right, if the authentic fields, if they grow the wheat from there, they get these effects, like the Ebner effect. They get changes in the growth. I go, yeah, but you could get all that from masers. Microwave lasers were just up above. So, I mean, and I said that because around 87, 88, we had this whole push, we had Derek Dollar, Trevor Constable, all this stuff was coming out, and actually had I was trying to get that by the Tesla Book Company, by Health Research, and I was going to get funding from the Rudolf Steiner Research Foundation in Redondo Beach. And we're trying to put all this stuff together and put this big thing. It was almost like this lightning bolt from the dark came through, and it's too much long of a story to tell here. I'll tell you that another time, of all the different things, how they fell apart. But there was certainly interference from, we could say, dark corners of both physical and spiritual forces to really make sure none of that happened. But I was certain that somebody said, I said, well, the crop circles. I said, no, man, I said, they're fake. They're doing them. And I go, how do you know? I said, the symbols are wrong. I said, if it's Earth Mother's putting this stuff up, I said, there would be a far different symbolism appearing right now. Because while we're trying to come out with all this etheric stuff and counter space and explain that, everybody's getting into fractals and James Gleick's book, chaos and this and that. I'm going, God, it's like, this is a real uphill battle. Not that there isn't something to that stuff. It's interesting stuff. And we work with fractal antennas and stuff, which actually are really wonderful in their effects on life. So I'm not saying that stuff's bad, but it was almost like there was this enforced distraction from the universe that prevented us doing it. So then John Lash and Judy Wood, they did a talk online years ago, Message to the Crop Circle Wizards. And they were hypothesizing, right, that as I had suspected for a long time and still do, that the crop circles were being done by maser satellites. And they were saying that basically, Judy Wood and John Lash were saying that, yeah, when they did them on 9/11 and vaporized the buildings, that those are the same satellites, that they're just playing with them, keeping them in tune and they're just doing the crop circles for fun and messing with people's heads. So, yeah, that ties in a lot of different things. So whether or not Paradise, California, Lahaina, there's certainly a lot of dodgy aspects to it. I don't know absolutely. It basically, it pains me deeply. Compassion is a terrible burden to bear. When you put your mind, you send like Schauberger sending his consciousness out into the forest to feel the waters and do that. And I do that. But in events like this, I sit there and I try to think out and look, and I'll look on Google Earth and I'll go down and I'll try to get into the place and then imagine this coming through and what could happen. And it's like, God, the pain of what went through there, all the people that got burned. Yeah, so probably it does smell like a setup. to me. I couldn't say that for sure. I would tend in that direction. And, but people show, well, look, here's this video of a beam coming down, right? But the dudes don't have beams, right? There's not going to be any visible signature. It's more the stuff like where you see that line of cars and the blue car in the middle isn't melted and all the ones around it are.
The
right?
blue
Because
roofs.
the lasers reflect out. Yeah, that whole thing. So there is something to all that. Like I say, we can't say for sure, but pays to keep an open mind. And as my old friend Vince Gaddis, he wrote Invisible Horizons, where in 1965 it was published, where he coined the term the Bermuda Triangle. He discovered it. He wrote Invisible Fires and Lights, American Indian Myths and Mysteries, things like that. But anyway, I rescued Vince from a nursing home back in like 1985 and lived with us for like 8 years. I found him in a nursing home. I go, man, you can't live here. We got a spare bedroom. You're coming with us. And but he was a Fortean, right? He was a member of the original Fortean Society under Tiffany Thayer and stuff. And he'd always tell me, he said, the mark of a true Fortean is to retain a suspended judgment until all the facts are in. He said, people always want to jump to conclusions. And it's these worldviews and the false logic, in the trivium, the logic before the grammar, because the worldview is so sure. That's the disruption of this process. So, yeah, I'm suspicious, but I can't make any determination. It's a true tragedy, and it really hurts to even think about it, for these beautiful things to be happening, beautiful things to be destroyed, the happenings of that. And I expect we're going to see far worse. I had that on one ayahuasca experience, and I was like, that stuff was always rough on my body. And then people say, you're on, and it's been long years since I've done it. And I go, man, the last thing I want to do is lay on the floor and puke. Last time I did it, I thought it was going to kill me. It was like so intense. I really thought I was going to die. But then I'm thinking, okay, when I'm coming back together, how you feeling? I'm thinking I'm feeling better in general, and then the world general. And all of a sudden I had this feeling, and I went into the minds of all the generals and all the technology. All of a sudden I was inside all the technology and all the stuff that they had all over the world and setting up for all these wars and so on. I was like, like hundreds of military bases. And I was like, oh my God, how do I retreat out of this consciousness? This is like, oh God, this is some real demonic stuff. I was like, I had to get back out of that. That was insane. So there's some really bad people on this world. And of course, with the technology, John Lilly's solid state entity, you know about that?
I've heard of it. I think you might have been the one that originally mentioned it to me.
Yeah. No, that's real key to this. Italian John Lilly's concept of the solid state entity, this malevolent silicon-based entity, which travels around the galaxy, searching out primitive electromagnetic signals so it can infiltrate the minds of scientists and engineer the technology so it can fully incarnate. Right. And he had this vision. He'd go, fuck. He went and called the White House and stuff, right? And if he didn't have statue, they would have locked him up. But he said, shut down those big computers in Maryland, right? The NSA, shut that stuff down now. We're in big trouble, man.
Is that related to Ahriman?
Yeah, I was going to say the second part of that, there's a great book, which is actually on the Steiner archives online, The Computer and the Incarnation of Ahriman. And it ties in everything exactly. It matches perfectly with, and he talks about, electric light bulb and, being developed. He gives the year 1879, which was Edison, but it was actually developed 7 or 8 years before that by others. We know Edison was just a thief. He was a genius in many ways, but he's a genius thief too, of other people's ideas. But also, there was the Boolean logic came in, what we call the calculating machines. And, the calculating machines are non-human logic. So basically in the 1870s, you had non-human light and non-human logic started happening on this plane. And it took some decades for them to weave together, but the Boolean logic, the non-human logic, worked into Herman Hollerith, 1879, the American Calculator Company, which became IBM, right? And Steiner said 1879 was a key year for the incarnation of Ahriman, right? So remember the HAL 9000? 2001, A Space Odyssey. I think, retain a suspended judgment, but keep your mind open to all these different facts. it's a wide field of data. And again, that's why I want to do these workshops. That's why I want to turn people on to all these ideas. I go, man, it'd be a shame if I pass on and don't get all these, turn people on to all these. I do it in smaller groups. I have these discussions, but there's so much material. I mean, I could have done screen share for like 5 hours with you.
Yeah.
I'd probably run out of voice. Yeah, anyway, we can do this anytime, Sky. I really appreciate, and I hope you can edit that into something sensible.
Absolutely.
I know I rambled a bit here and there, but there's probably some good sound bites in there.
I appreciate it greatly.
And I appreciate your inquiring mind. And I want to say, you came up with that name, Etherica.
Yes.
I don't know if you know, but for many years, I had etherica.com.
Oh, no way.
And I was using that, and I actually had the old blog spots, and I was actually running a blog spot on there. And some of the stuff, which is now on my thomasbrown.org, and I'm slowly working into the alchemics.art, I actually had on etherica.com. So
wow,
it's a great name. I'm glad you picked it up.
Yeah, it's probably partly inspired from me talking with you.
Yeah, it was funny when I saw you did that. I go, oh, that's great. I should have copyrighted it. But I did with the K. That was it just popped in my, it was actually from, what was his name? The guy that did Cymatica with the K, right?
Yeah, it just seemed like it flowed well. Yeah.
It did. It flowed well, and I think it's perfect. So I'm glad you got it and you're working with it. You've got a wonderful mind, Sky, and I wish you all the best. You're interviewing some people. I'm only really listening to clips on Instagram right now. I need to sit down, but I've been so absorbed. I'm doing 8 to 10 hours a day on what I'm doing right now. And I'm burned out and excited, all rolled into one.
Well, this was an honor. I'm so glad we got to talk again, and I'm looking forward to the future. Do you have any last words or thoughts that you want to put out there before we close out? And maybe give people a little bit of your information on your websites, anything like that?
Yeah, sure. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build up some momentum on the Alchemics, and that's spelled with a K, ALKEMIX.art, which actually goes to my Substack. And I've used Alchemics. That was my name on Skype in 1986, right? So I was used as online identity.
Wow, you're on Skype right away, huh?
Yeah. No, I had websites up and running in 1996 for different things. And so, yeah, I've used that name as, I don't even know why, it just seemed like a natural, so I just grab it. So, yeah, just on that. And I'm trying to develop really, what I would encourage people to do is read the articles on the Goethe's approach to science, and don't take my word for it. And I've actually developed my own sort of system out of that, because I'm reading all these things, and some people say it one way, some people say it the other way. And it's like, after long meditations, I sort of like taking my notes and putting them together. And it's like, I finally came up, that's my version. I haven't found that version anywhere. But I believe it covers all the bases. And I've actually gotten some nice notes from some of the anthroposophists who are not in the mainstream of anthroposophy, saying they appreciate my work and thank you. So, I feel, and that's good, because I look at their work because they're on the outside. Everybody's has their own system, right? Everybody needs to develop their own system. There is no single system. I got that from, Robert Anton Wilson had that book long ago, Right Where You Are Sitting Now, right? That's it. When you die and your life flashes before your eyes, which is your chakra system ripping from your system, and we could have another whole discussion on that. But the heart chakra is the peaceful deities, your interaction through the heart with people. The crown chakra is your interaction with people, through the mind, through the intellect. But when you die and it separates and you go into the bardo realm and you're no longer in, what do you take with you? You take, scientists told me that Earth is going around the sun. Yeah. And that all the stuff that, that's just an illusion. All this stuff I see is illusion. The secondary qualities, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, they're just illusions. They're just vibrations of the primary qualities, which are density and weight and position. Nothing's real except them, right? All this stuff's an illusion. It's like, that's scientism. So, so I would say, what do you take with you is your experience. So build an experiential foundation for these. For me, the mandala is my theory of knowledge, right? Because I can bring everything into that. And I will be writing articles and doing this. In fact, we could actually do a whole talk on just that. Eventually I will. I actually didn't want to even teach it. I wanted to keep it, because everybody got their own ideas. They go, oh, that's not, I remember talking to somebody on Facebook, we were having a discussion about the Vajrayana mandala. So I put mine up there and started, they go, well, the colors are all wrong. And the direction, I go, no, but there's a reason. They don't even know. They're just dogmatically worshiping this stuff. So I say, strip the dogmatic and cultural stuff off, and what's the archetype laying underneath? So search for the archetypes and find an archetype that resonates with you and use it as a theory of knowledge, and then look at all these systems. So for me, Steiner's etheric system matches perfectly with the Vajrayana mandala. They're the same system. Just one deals with the external world and the other one deals with my internal world, but they relate totally through the natural sciences. And that's what, if I had 3D animators and script writers and a big budget like Gaia TV, we'd be just making real simple stuff so people could just watch this, right? But it seems like haven't found any philanthropists yet that want to fund anything. I tried contacting Gaia, but they said, with some of this stuff, and they go, no, we've already got enough stuff. We don't want to hear from you.
Yeah.
So, okay.
It's a bummer.
Well, I've lost stuff. I lost a Tesla book company because this guy, Jim Fueling, stepped in and stole it out from underneath me when I had an agreement with John Ratzlaff. This is in 1986. It's a long story, but fundamentally, this guy stole it to me. We had a handshake deal, and I went home to work out the paperwork and get the money. And I said, within the week, I'll have the payment, because John wouldn't take a $10,000 check down to do it, right? He said, I bought the whole money, $40,000. This was all of his research on Tesla's patents, four-drawer file cabinets full of all of Tesla's, the patent wrappers, all the correspondence, everything. So then I want all the money up front. And I said, no problem, I can do it. He's going, great. He goes, I went up there with Dollard, and I goes, this is perfect. This is great. I love you guys. I'm going to do it. But we told him we were going to dump the Bearden books and, Elizabeth Rausch's books. I said, that stuff's got nothing to do with Tesla. We're going to stick purely with Tesla. There's going to be a division of Borderland Sciences. Whatever stuff we keep may go over there, but Tesla stuff's just Tesla. And somehow word got back to some Bearden, I think it was, who some people really love, but I was always highly suspicious of somebody's got above top secret clearance for Soviet weapons capability and has given lectures at freak science conferences about Soviet weapons capability. So something's fishy here. But anyway, yeah, so I called John up. I said, hey, okay, look, I'm gonna have money in 2 days. I just worked the thing out, mortgage my house. Actually, my house was paid for. I said, okay, I'll take a mortgage on my, I said, I'll have the 40K on Wednesday. I'll get you the check. I can do a bank transfer. I'll drive up there and hand you the check. What do you want? He's going, something came up. I'm going, what? He goes, his voice is shaking. I sold the company. I go, what do you mean you sold the company? He goes, oh, no, this guy, he was real interested in it, and he wanted to do it. And he was like, yeah, really wanted to do it. And I said, did he give you $40,000? He goes, no, he gave me a $10,000 deposit. I go, well, what the hell? You wouldn't take that from me? He's going, oh, no, you'll love this guy. I told him about you. He wants to work with you. And so we're getting to Jim Fueling from Fueling Engineering. He's got the CAM patents for General Motors, right? This guy's like he didn't even know who Tesla was. So he takes over the company, which has pretty much disappeared after that. And he's going, oh, no, he come out and visit us in the Integratron. They didn't even care about the Tesla coil. It freaked him out. They wanted to get away from there and go out in the desert and drink Budweiser, right? And we're going, no, we don't drink that stuff. We drink good beer here. You guys go drink your buds. But they had their nitro-fueled honcho trucks and stuff. And it's like, these guys, God. So anyway, he goes, no, look, I want you to run the company. And he brought me up to Ventura, where his company was. And I know it wasn't going to work, but I thought, okay, I'll give him the time of day. I'll go up there and see what his offer was to run the company. He basically wanted me to drop Borderland and manage that company and push the Bearden books and all that stuff, which I thought was bullshit. And that's another whole discussion. And at least aspects of them certainly weren't. And so I went up there, and no, it was a crazy day at his shop. And I'm sitting there all day waiting for him to talk, right? Because one of the employees that got pissed off, scratched up some new car that they had just finished for GM, and they had police there, and I go, what the hell, right? And it's like, we finally have a meeting, and he's going, oh, look, he takes me out to his house on the coast, and he says, look, he said, yeah, look, he said, name your price. He said, he said, we'll get you a house here. He said, get you a house on the coast here, basically on Ventura Beach. So, yeah, we'll get you a house, and, nice job, manage this book company. He said, yeah, no problem. I'm going, yeah, but I already have what I'm doing. This isn't what I'm doing. He's going, yeah, no. He goes, but look, he said, yeah, you can make some good money. It's be good, and you've got some good people around. And I'm thinking, yeah, one of his employees just scratched up this whole new car they were just finishing up some job for General Motors. I'm going, I don't want anything to do with these guys. And I walked away. And it's like, but what was weird, years later, when internet, because this was 1986. Right, so early 2000s, I was searching on I wonder whatever happened to Jim Fueling. So I searched, and he was dead, and he'd won some land speed record, right, from going 500 miles an hour or something on Bonneville Salt Flats, and he was suspected of being part of the CARET program, CARET, Civilian Applications for Re-engineered Extraterrestrial Technology. Ah, interesting, right? But he was definitely had some spooky connections. And that's what they threw him in. So, I had stuff like that happen. And then the guy, old Doc Wilborn from Health Research, he wanted to sell health research. And I thought, and I was the one guy, I used to go visit Doc Wilborn. They go, man, he's such an asshole. He won't let anybody buy. So I go, I've seen his whole shop. I see he's really nice to me. They go, that's weird because he doesn't like anybody, right? So he wanted to sell it to me. He had 6 old presses running with these old women running it. It was what a hell of a setup. He's going, you ever seen anything like this? I go, yeah, I actually ran AB Dick 360 with the T51 head on when I was a teenager, right? I apprenticed as a printer. I know how all this stuff works. That's okay. And, but yeah, again, I offered him a down payment. He wanted the whole thing. So the Rudolf Steiner Foundation was going to fund it. Yeah, unfortunately. And then out of the blue, some guy steps in and buys the thing on down payment off him and talks him into it, some sales guy. And he's going, no, I sold to this guy. And I went and talked to him. And this guy was some nut, driving around. This is up in Mokelumne Hill, the gold country. And this guy's driving like a madman in his Mercedes on these little roads and with his girlfriend. And she's freaked out. And I'm going, oh. And then, unfortunately, Don's going, yeah, well, let's, because Philo Farnsworth III, he's telling me, he goes, the Dover, the borderlands. He said, that's it. He said, that's your destiny. I can see it. You're on the way. But then all these weird things, and then Don Hosier, right, from the Rudolf Steiner, he dropped dead. The Clear Blue. We were just gonna start pouring more money into Borderland and up the stuff, and we had so many different sort of things came in, and then R.J. Reynolds, right, R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company, Josh, true gentleman and a scholar. What a wonderful guy, and he got in touch. Knew him for a couple of years, and every now and then he'd send us 200 shares of RJR, would cash in, and I'd do paperbacks and send him copies with, thank you. Here's the next book we published with the money. And I remember he called me up one day. He's going, man, he goes, I've given away tens of millions, untold millions. He goes, I don't even know what I gave away to all these people over these years. He goes, nobody, because I don't got anything to show for it. He said, I give you 10,000 here and there. He said, I've got all these books. He said, you're helping Eric Dollar. And he said, you work with Trevor. He said, I want to give you $10 million. He said, I don't have that much left. He said, so I've given a lot away. And he said, but I do want to set you up. He said, so I'm going to give you $10 million. And he said, but it's got to go through the lawyers. He said, we need to set the foundation. So we'll need to roll Borderland in, whatever. He said, are you okay with that? I said, yeah, of course. Borderland's always ready for metamorphoses. It's all about the work. Whatever carries the work forward. And then he said, well, what do you think of Elizabeth Rauscher? And I said, oh, she's a very nice person. He said, well, I understand you don't like her work. I said, well, I disagree with her work. I said, like Eric Dollar pointed out, she's made major errors, in her, definition of the square root of -1, and from energy from counter space. That's counter to, and that was kind of why we're going to drop those books with the Tesla Book Company. I said, but as a person, I said, no, she's a lovely person. I've got no problem with her as a human being. I said, I can disagree with people scientifically. He said, well, that's good. He says, because she's an old dear friend of mine, and I'd like her to be on the board. He said, you mind her being on the board with you. I said, am I the chairman? He goes, you're the chairman. I said, then I don't care who's on the board. So we had those discussions. And anyway, and then about a week later, he says, yeah, call. He goes, oh, look, it's all in motion. He's like, I go in the hospital for a couple tests. He said, when I get out, he said, bring you out here and we'll sort all this stuff out. He went in the hospital and died a few days later.
Wow.
And his friends, our mutual friends, think he was bumped off. And it turned out, and they went to the lawyers to try to figure out what was happening with it. So the lawyers denied everything. And all the money, his estate, which was worth about 90 million, went to some trust that the lawyers were on to like manage old folks' homes.
Wow.
At least that was the story I got. It was probably close to accurate. And he had a library. He had this phenomenal library. He was one of the only people who had like authentic Mayan codices in private hands and stuff, and all that stuff disappeared and stuff.
Wow.
So, I mean, I'm so close, all these things. So I've had all these and a few more incidents. I've had like some major like dark force strikes in my life trying to keep it going. But through it all, I mean, I just kept on the work and on maintaining that center balance because, well, just passing through, right? You make the best of it that you can. And do the best for those around you and help them where you can and, learn. So, yeah, in that sense, that's, those are some long final words.
Much appreciated. Amen to all of that.
Yeah. Scott, thank you. I really appreciate this time and look forward to connecting again soon. And I'll send you, when I get a chance, I need to take a little break. But I'll get back. I'll send you a couple of things like the mandala and my awesome. Hollow Earth Kabbalah from like 1983 and stuff. I think they'll get a kick out of that stuff.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right. Well, till next time.
All right.